Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down a framework that is becoming absolutely central to how we think about climate change and corporate responsibility. If you've ever seen a company talk about its carbon footprint and wondered what that really means, well, this is your complete guide to the 4 scopes of carbon accounting.
So, here's how we're going to tackle this. We're going to use what you could call a zoom-out model. We'll start super focused, right on the emissions a company makes itself. Then we'll zoom out to its suppliers, then to its entire network. And finally, we'll zoom out even further to see how it might actually be creating a positive impact on the world.
All right, let's kick things off with the most basic question of all. How in the world do you actually measure something as huge and complicated as a global company's climate impact? I mean, this isn't just some academic exercise. It's a really critical question. When a company slaps a carbon-neutral sticker on its product, what are they including in that calculation? Is it just the emissions from their own factories? What about the electricity they buy from the grid? Or what about the emissions created when you, the customer, actually use their product? You see, without a standard set of rules, that term can mean almost anything. And it's a problem the biggest companies on the planet are wrestling with right now. You can see it in this headline. Microsoft came to realize that even if they made their own offices perfectly green, it was just a drop in the bucket compared to the impact of their massive global supply chain. It's a perfect example of how a company's real footprint stretches way, way beyond its own 4 walls. So to cut through all this confusion, we have a global standard. It's called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, or GHG protocol for short. Honestly, the best way to think about it is like the official rulebook for carbon accounting. It gives everyone a shared language and a clear, structured way to categorize emissions into these things called scopes.
Okay, so let's get into the framework itself. We're going to start with the most straightforward category, the inner circle of responsibility, Scope 1 emissions.
Think of this as ground zero. This is the foundation. We're talking about emissions that a company generates directly from its own operations. It's the stuff they have the most immediate and obvious control over.
So getting a bit more precise, these are emissions coming from sources that the company literally owns or has direct control over. You know, it's the natural gas burning in their own boilers and furnaces, the gasoline in their fleet of company-owned trucks. It's the emissions coming right out of their own smokestacks, both literally and figuratively.
Let's use an example that might be pretty familiar. A university campus. Its Scope 1 emissions would be things like the natural gas it burns in its own heating plants to keep the dorms and lecture halls warm. It would also be the exhaust fumes from all the university-owned maintenance vehicles driving around campus. The strategy to reduce this is pretty clear, right? Electrify the fleet. It's simple, direct, and totally within the university's control. Okay, so we've got the direct stuff down. Now it's time to zoom out. We're moving from what a company directly owns to the emissions that it causes indirectly. And this is where the picture starts to get a whole lot bigger, and frankly, a lot more complicated. So first up in this wider view is Scope 2. This is all about the energy a company buys. Very few companies generate 100% of their own power. Scope 2 accounts for the emissions that were created at the power plant that generated the electricity the company uses to, keep the lights on and run its machinery. This comparison makes the difference crystal clear. Let's go back to our university. If the campus has its own little power plant burning fuel to create heat and electricity, that's Scope 1. But all the electricity it pulls from the main city grid to power the computers in the library and the projectors in lecture halls, the emissions from generating that power fall under Scope 2. And now, we zoom out one more time to the biggest, broadest, and often most important layer of them all, Scope 3. What is Scope 3? Well, it's basically everything else. It covers all the other indirect emissions up and down a company's entire value chain, from its raw materials suppliers all the way to its customers. And for most companies, this is the real story. People often call Scope 3 the giant, and for a very good reason. It is absolutely massive. It's incredibly difficult to measure accurately, and it forces a company to look far beyond its own operations at its entire ecosystem.
This slide shows it perfectly. Think about a big athletic brand. The emissions from its corporate headquarters are pretty small, right? But what about the emissions from growing all that cotton, or the massive amounts of energy used in the overseas factories that actually make the shoes and clothes? And what about the energy you use to wash and dry those clothes over and over? All of that, that's Scope 3. It's often more than 90% of their total footprint.
Now, in complete contrast, think about a service-based company, like a big consulting firm. They don't make anything physical. So what's their big impact? Well, their Scope 3 footprint is totally different. It's dominated by things like employee business travel,
thousands and thousands of flights every year to meet with clients all over the world. So we've talked about all the negative impacts, all the pollution accounted for in scopes 1, 2, and 3, but now we get to a fascinating twist in the story. There's an emerging idea that tries to account not for the negative impact, but for a company's positive contribution.
Welcome to Scope 4, also known as avoided emissions. Now, this is a much newer idea, and it's not as standardized as the others. But the concept is powerful. Instead of counting the pollution a company creates, Scope 4 tries to measure the pollution that its products or services help other people avoid creating. It's a shift from measuring a negative footprint to calculating a positive handprint.
A perfect example is a video conferencing company. Its Scope 4 impact would be calculated by figuring out how many carbon-heavy business trips were avoided because people could just have a virtual meeting instead. It's about measuring the emissions that didn't happen because that company's product exists.
And this is no small thing. With business travel roaring back to life, technologies that help us avoid getting on a plane are more important than ever. For some companies, especially in tech or green energy, the positive impact of their Scope 4 handprint could be absolutely enormous, potentially far bigger than their own direct footprint from Scopes 1 and 2.
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together and look at what this complete toolkit for understanding climate impact really gives us. And here you can see the whole picture. It's a journey that starts with direct control in Scope 1, moves to direct influence over energy in Scope 2, expands to the entire value chain in Scope 3, and finally looks at enabling positive change in the world through Scope 4. Together, these 4 scopes give us a truly complete 360-degree lens to analyze a company's real impact on the climate.
This framework gives us the tools to ask the tough questions and analyze a company's claims, but it also leaves us with a huge critical question, especially around this newest scope. Is Scope 4 a vital tool that encourages companies to create real climate solutions, or could it become a convenient loophole, a form of greenwashing that lets companies distract us from their own ongoing pollution in Scopes 1, 2, and 3? That right there is the critical debate that's going to shape the future of corporate accountability.